I lay awake that night, despite my exhaustion. I watched Helene sleep fitfully, murmuring, her hand reaching across unconsciously to check that her children were beside her. At 5, while it was still dark, I climbed out of bed, wrapping myself in several blankets, and tiptoed downstairs to boil water for coffee. The dining room was still infused with the scents of the previous evening, wood from the grate, and a faint hint of sausage meat that caused my stomach to rumble. I made myself a hot drink and sat behind the bar, gazing out across the empty square as the sun came up. As the blue light became streaked with orange, it was just possible to distinguish a faint shadow in the far right-hand corner where the prisoner had fallen. Had that young man had a wife, a child? Were they sitting at this moment, composing letters to him or praying for his safe return? I took a sip of my drink and forced myself to look away. It was about I was about to go back to my room to dress when there was a rap at the door. I flinched, seeing a shadow behind the curtain screen. I pulled my blanket around me, staring at the silhouette, trying to work out who would be calling on us at such an hour. Whether it was the commandant, come to torment me about what he knew. I walked silently towards the door. I lifted the screen, and there, on the other side, was Lillian Bethune. Her hair was piled up in pin curls. She was wearing the black astrakhan coat, and her eyes were shadowed. She glanced behind her as I unlocked the top and bottom bolts and opened the door. Lillian? Are you... Do you need something? I said. She reached into her coat and pulled out an envelope, which she thrust at me. For you, she said. I glanced at it. But how did you... She held up a pale hand, shook her head. It had been months since any of us had received a letter. The Germans had long kept us in a communication vacuum. I held it, disbelieving, then recovered my manners. Would you like to come in? Have some coffee? I have a little real coffee put by. She gave me the smallest of smiles. No, thank you. I have to go home to my daughter. Before I could even thank her, she was trotting up the street in her high heels, her back hunched against the cold. I shut the screen and rebolted the door. I sat down and tore open the envelope. His voice, so long absent, filled my ears. Dearest Sophie, it is so long since I heard from you. I pray you are safe. I tell myself in darker moments that some part of me would feel it, like the vibrations of a distant bell, if you were not. I have so little to impart. For once, I have no desire to translate into color the world I see around me. Words seem wholly inadequate. Know only that, precious wife, I am sound of mind and body, and that my spirit is kept whole by the thought of you. The men here clutch photographs of their loved ones like talismans, protection against the dark, crumpled, dirty images endowed with the properties of treasures. I need no photograph to conjure you before me, Sophie. I need only to close my eyes to recall your face, your voice, your scent, and you cannot know how much you comfort me. Know, my darling, that I mark each day not, like my fellow soldiers, as one that I am grateful to survive, but thanking God that each means I must surely be 24 hours closer to returning to you. Your Edward. It was dated 2 months previously. I don't know if it was exhaustion or perhaps shock from the previous day's events. I'm not someone who cries easily, if at all, but I put the letter carefully back into its envelope, then rested my head on my hands, and in the cold, empty kitchen, I sobbed. I could not tell the other villagers why it was time to eat the pig, but the approach of Christmas gave me the perfect excuse. The officers were to have their dinner on Christmas Eve in Le Coq Rouge, a larger gathering than normal, and it was agreed that while they were here, Madame Pauline would hold a secret réveillon at her home, 2 streets down from the square. For as long as I could keep the German officers occupied, our little band of townspeople would be safe to roast and eat the pig in the bread oven that Madame Pauline had in her cellar. Helene would help me serve the Germans their dinner, then sneak through the hole in the cellar wall and out down the alley to join the children at Madame Pauline's house. Those villagers who lived too far from her to walk through the town unnoticed would remain in her home after curfew, hiding if any Germans came checking. "But that isn't fair," Helene remarked, when I outlined the plan to the mayor in front of her 2 days later. "If you remain here, you will be the one person to miss it. That's not right, given all you did to safeguard the pig." "One of us has to stay," I pointed out. It's far safer if we can be sure that the officers are all in one place." "But it won't be the same." "Well, nothing is the same," I said curtly. "And you know as well as I do that our commandant will notice if I am gone." I saw her exchange glances with the mayor. "Helene, don't fuss. I am le patron. He expects to see me here every evening. He will know something is not going on if I am missing." I sounded, even to my own ears, as if I was protesting too much. "Look," I continued, forcing myself to sound conciliatory. "Save me some meat. Bring it back in a napkin. I can promise you that if the Germans are given rations enough to feast on, I will make sure I help myself to a share. I will not suffer, I promise." They appeared mollified, but I couldn't tell them the truth. Ever since I had discovered that the commandant knew about the pig, I had lost my appetite for it. That he had not revealed his knowledge of its existence, let alone punished us, didn't make me joyous with relief, but deeply uneasy. Now, when I saw him staring at my portrait, I no longer felt gratified that even a German could recognize my husband's talent. When he walked into the kitchen to make casual conversation, I became stiff and tense, afraid he might mention it. "Yet again," the mayor said, "I suspect we find ourselves in your debt." He looked beaten down. His daughter had been ill for a week. His wife had once told me that every time Louisa fell ill, he barely slept for anxiety. "Don't be ridiculous," I said briskly. "Compared to what our men are doing, this is just another day's work." My sister knew me too well. She didn't ask questions directly. That was not Helene's style. But I could feel her watching me, could hear the faint edge to her voice whenever the question of the réveillon has raised. Finally, a week before Christmas, I confided in her. She had been sitting on the side of her bed, doing her hair, the brush steeled in her hand. "Why do you think he has not told anyone?" I asked when I finished. She stared at the bedspread. Then she looked at me. It was with a kind of dread. I think he likes you, she said. The week before Christmas was busy, even though we had little with which to prepare for the festivities. Helene and a couple of the older women had been sewing rag dolls for the children. They were primitive, their skirts made of sacking, their faces embroidered stockings. But it was important that the children who remained in St. Piran had little magic in the bleak Christmas. I grew a little bolder in my own efforts. Twice I stole potatoes from the German rations, mashing what was left to disguise the smaller amounts, and ferried them in my pockets to those who seemed particularly frail. I stole the smaller carrots and fed them into the hem of my skirt so that even when I was stopped and searched, they found nothing. To the mayor I took 2 jars of chicken stock, so that his wife could make Louisa a little broth. The child was pale and feverish. His wife told me she kept little down and seemed to be retreating into herself. Looking at her, swallowed by the vast old bed with its threadbare blankets, listless and coughing intermittently, I thought briefly that I could barely blame her. What life was this for children? I tried to hide the worst of it from them as best we could, but they found themselves in a world where men were shot in the street, where strangers howled their mothers from the beds by their hair for some trivial offense, like walking in a banned wood or failing to show a German officer sufficient respect. Mimi viewed our world with silent, suspicious eyes, which broke Helene's heart. Aurelian grew angry. I could see it building in him like a volcanic force, and I prayed daily that when he finally erupted, it would not become at huge cost to himself. But the biggest news that week was the arrival through my door of a newspaper, roughly printed and entitled Journal des Occupés. The only newspaper allowed in St. Piran was the German-controlled Bulletin de Lille, which was so obviously German propaganda that few of us did more with it than use it for kindling. But this one gave military information, naming the towns and villages under occupation. It commented on official communiques and contained humorous articles about the occupation, limericks about the black bread, and cartoonish sketches of the officers in charge. It begged its readers not to inquire where it had come from and to destroy it when it had been read. It also contained a list it called von Heinrich's 10 Commandments that ridiculed the many petty rules imposed upon us. I cannot tell you the boost that 4-page scrap gave our little town. In the few days up to the Rebellion, a steady stream of townspeople came into the bar and either thumbed through its pages in the lavatory. During the day we kept it at the bottom of the basket of old paper, or passed on its news and better jokes face to face. We spent so long in the lavatory that the Germans asked if some sickness were going around. From the newspaper we discovered that other nearby towns had suffered our fate. We heard of the dreaded reprisal camps where men were starved and worked half to death. We discovered that Paris knew little of our plight, and that 400 women and children had been evacuated from Roubaix, where food supplies were even lower than they were in Saint Piran. It was not that these pieces of information in themselves constituted anything useful, but it reminded us that we were still part of France, that our little town was not alone in its travails. More importantly, the newspaper itself was a matter of some pride. The French were still capable of subverting the will of the Germans. There were feverish discussions as to how this might have reached us. That it had been delivered to Le Coq Rouge went some way to alleviating the growing discontent caused by our cooking for the Germans. I watched Lillian Bethune hurry past to fetch her bread in her astrakhan coat and had my own ideas. The commandant had insisted that we eat. It was the cook's privilege, he said, on Christmas Eve. We had believed ourselves preparing for 18, only to discover that the final two were Helene and me. We spent hours running around the kitchen, our exhaustion outweighed by our silent, unspoken pleasure in what we knew to be going on too straight from us. The prospect of a clandestine celebration and proper meat for our children. To be given 2 whole meals as well seemed almost too much. And yet, not too much. I could never have turned down a meal again. The food was delicious. Duck roasted with orange slices and preserved ginger, potatoes de with green beans, all followed by a plate of cheeses. Helene ate hers, marveling that she would be eating 2 suppers. I can give someone else my portion of pork, she said, sucking a bone. I might keep a little bit of the crackling. What do you think? It was so good to see her cheerful. Our kitchen that night seemed a happy place. There were extra candles, giving us a little more precious light. There were the familiar smells of Christmas. Helene had studded one of the oranges with cloves and hung it over the stove so that the scent infused the whole room. If you didn't think too hard, you could listen to the glasses clinking, the laughter and conversation, and forget that the next room was occupied by Germans. At around 9:30, I wrapped my sister up and helped her downstairs so that she could climb through to our neighbor's cellar and then out through their coal hatch. She would run down the unlit back alleys to Madame Pouillen's house, where she would join Aurelian and the children, whom we had taken there earlier in the afternoon. We had moved the pig the day before. It was quite large by then, and Aurelian had to hold it still while I fed it an apple to stop it squealing, and with a clean swipe of his knife, Monsieur Bautin, the butcher, slaughtered it. I replaced the bricks in the gap behind her, all the while listening to the men in the bar above me. I realized with some satisfaction that for the first time in months I wasn't cold. To be hungry is to be almost permanently cold too. It was a lesson I was sure I would never forget. Edward, I hope you're warm, I whispered into the empty cellar as my sister's footsteps faded on the other side of the wall. I hope you eat as well as we have done this night. When I re-emerged into the hallway, I jumped. The commandant was gazing at my portrait. I couldn't find you, he said. I thought you would be in the kitchen. I just went for some air, I stammered. I see something different in this picture every time I look at it. She has something enigmatic about her. I mean, you. He half smiled at his own mistake. You have something enigmatic about you. I said nothing. I hope I do not embarrass you, but I have to tell you, I have thought for some time that this is the most beautiful painting I have ever seen. It is a lovely work of art. Yes. You excluded subject? I didn't answer. He swilled the wine in his glass. When he spoke next, it was with his eyes on the ruby liquid. Do you honestly believe yourself plain, madame? I believe beauty is in the eye of the beholder. When my husband tells me I am beautiful, I believe it because I know in his eyes I am. He looked up then. His eyes locked onto mine and would not let them go. He held my gaze for so long that I felt my breathing start to quicken. Edward's eyes were the windows to his soul. His very self was laid bare in them. The commandant's were intense, shrewd, and yet somehow veiled, as if to hide his true feelings. I was afraid that he might be able to see my own crumbling composure, that he might see through my lies if I allowed him in. I was the first to look away. He reached across the table to the crate that the Germans had delivered earlier and pulled out a bottle of cognac. Have a drink with me, madame. No, thank you, Herr Commandant. I glanced towards the door to the dining room, where the officers would be finishing their dessert. One. It's Christmas. I knew an odor when I heard it. I thought of the others eating the roast pork a few doors away from where we sat. I thought of Mimi with pork fat dribbling down her chin, of Aurelian smiling and joking as he boasted of their great deception. He needed some happiness. Twice that week he had been sent home from school for fighting, but had refused to tell me what it had been about. I needed them all to have one good meal. Then, very well. I accepted a glass and sipped. The cognac was like fire trickling down my throat. I felt restorative, a sharp kick. He downed his own glass, watched me drink mine, then pushed the bottle towards me, signaling that I should refill it. We sat in silence. I wondered how many people had come to eat the pig. Helene had thought it would be 14. 2 of the older people had been afraid to break their curfew. The priest had promised to take leftovers to those stuck in their homes after Christmas Mass. As we drank, I watched him. His jaw was set, suggesting someone unbending, but without his military cap, his almost shaven hair gave his head an air of vulnerability. I tried to picture him out of uniform, a normal human being, going about his daily business, buying a newspaper, taking a holiday. But I couldn't. I couldn't see past his uniform. It's a lonely business, war, isn't it? I took a sip of my drink. You have your men. I have my family. We are neither of us exactly alone. It's not the same, though, is it? We all get by as best as we can. Do we? I'm not sure whether anyone can describe this as best. The cognac made me blunt. You were the one sitting in my kitchen, Herr Commandant. I suggest with respect that only one of us has a choice in the matter. A cloud passed across his face. He was unused to being challenged. Faint color rose to his cheeks, and I saw him with his arm raised, his gun aimed at a running prisoner. You really think of any of us has a choice? He said quietly. You really think this is how any of us would choose to live? surrounded by devastation, the perpetrators of it. Were you the witness what we see at the front, you would think yourself. He tailed off, shook his head. I'm sorry, madame. It's this time of the year. It's enough to make a man maudlin. And we all know that there is nothing worse than a maudlin soldier. He smiled then, an apology, and I relaxed a little. We sat there on either side of the kitchen table, sipping from our glasses, surrounded by the detritus of the meal. In the other room, the officers had begun to sing. I heard their voices lifting, the tune familiar, the words incomprehensible. The commandant tilted his head to listen. Then he put down his glass. You hate us being here, don't you? I blinked. I have always tried. You think your face betrays nothing, but I've watched you. Years in this job have taught me a lot about people and their secrets. Well, can we call a truce, madame? Just for these few hours? A truce? You shall forget that I'm part of an enemy army. I shall forget that you were a woman who spends much of her time working out how to subvert that army, and we shall just be two people. His face, just briefly, had softened. He held his glass towards mine. Almost reluctantly, I lifted my own. Let us avoid the subject of Christmas, lonely or otherwise. I would like you to tell me about the other artists at the Academy. Tell me how you came to meet them. I'm not sure how long we sat there. If I'm honest, the hours evaporated in conversation and the warm glow of alcohol. The commandant wanted to know everything about an artist's life in Paris. What kind of man was Matisse? Was his life as scandalous as his art? Oh no, he was the most intellectually rigorous of men, quite stern and very conservative in both his work and his domestic habits. But somehow, I thought for a moment of the bespectacled professor, how he would glance over to check that you had grasped each point before he showed you the next piece. Joyous! I think he gets great joy from what he does. The commandant thought about this, as if my answer had satisfied him. I once wanted to be a painter. I was no good, of course. I had to confront the truth of the matter very early on. He fingered the stem of his glass. I often think that the ability to earn a living by doing the thing one loves must be one of life's greatest gifts. I thought of Edward then, his face lost in concentration, peering at me from behind an easel. If I closed my eyes, I could still feel the warmth of the log fire on my right leg, the faint chill on the left where my skin was bare. I could see him lift an eyebrow, and the exact point at which his thoughts left his painting. I think that too. The first time I saw you, he had told me on our first Christmas Eve together. I watched you standing in the middle of that bustling store, and I thought you were the most self-contained woman I had ever seen. You looked as if the world could explode into fragments around you, and there you would be, your chin lifted, gazing out at it imperiously from under that magnificent hair. He lifted my hand to his mouth and kissed it tenderly. I thought you were a Russian bear, I told him. He had raised an eyebrow. We were in a packed brazier of ruddy Tarbigo. Grrr, he growled, until I was helpless with laughter. He had crushed me to him right there in the middle of the banquet, covering my neck with kisses. oblivious to the people eating around us. Grrr! They had stopped singing in the other room. I felt suddenly self-conscious and stood, as if to clear the table. "Please," said the commandant, motioning me to sit down. "Just sit a while longer. It's Christmas Eve, after all." "Your men will be expecting you to join them." "On the contrary, they enjoy themselves far more if their commandant is absent. It is not fair to impose myself on them all evening." "But quite fair to impose yourself on me," I thought. It was then that he asked, "Where is your sister?" "I told her to go to bed," I said. "She is a little under the weather, and she was very tired after cooking tonight. I wanted her to be quite well for tomorrow." "And what will you do to celebrate?" "Is there much for us to celebrate?" "Truce, madame," I shrugged. "We will go to church, perhaps visit some of our older neighbors. It is a hard day for them to be alone." "You look after everyone, don't you? It is no crime to be a good neighbor." "The basket of logs I had delivered for your own use. I know you took them to the mayor's house. His daughter is sick. She needs the extra warmth more than we do. You should know, madame, that nothing escapes me in this little town. Nothing." I couldn't meet his eyes. I was afraid that this time my face, the rapid beating of my heart, would betray me. I wished I could wipe from my mind all knowledge of the feast that was taking place a few 100 years from here. I wished I could escape the feeling that the commandant was playing a game of cat and mouse with me. I took another sip of cognac. The men were singing again. I knew this carol. I could almost make out the words. "Still Nacht, heilig Nacht, alles schlaft, einsam wacht." Why did he keep looking at me? I was afraid to speak, afraid to get up again in case he asked awkward questions. Yet just to sit and let him stare at me seemed to make me complicit in something. Finally, I took a small breath and looked up. He was still watching me. "Madame, will you dance with me? Just one dance. For Christmas's sake?" "Dance? Just one dance. I would like to be reminded of humanity's better side, just once this year." I don't think. I thought of Helene and the others down the road, free for one evening. I thought of Lillian Bethune. I studied the commandant's face. His request seemed genuine. "We shall just be two people." And then I thought of my husband. Would I wish him to have a sympathetic pair of arms to dance in? Just for one evening, did I not hope that somewhere many miles away some good-hearted woman might remind him in a quiet bar that the world could be a place of beauty? "I will dance with you, Herr Commandant," I said, "but only in the kitchen." He stood, held out his hand, and after a slight hesitation, I took it. His palm was surprisingly rough. I moved a few steps closer, not looking at his face, and then he rested his other hand on my waist. As the men in the next room sang, we began to move slowly around the table. Me acutely aware of his body only inches of my own. the pressure of his hand on my corset. I felt the rough surge of his uniform against my bare arm, and the soft vibration of his humming through his chest. I felt as if I were almost alight with tension, every sense monitoring my fingers, my arms, trying to ensure that I did not get too close, fearful that any point he might pull me to him. And all the while a voice repeated in my head, "I am dancing with a German." Still knocked, Heilig knocked, got sewn a while locked. But he didn't do anything. He hummed and he held me lightly, and he moved steadily in circles around the kitchen table. And just for a few minutes I closed my eyes and was a girl, alive, free from hunger and cold, dancing on the night before Christmas, my head a little giddy from the good cognac, breathing in the scent of spices and delicious food. I lived as Edward lived, relishing each small pleasure, allowing myself to see beauty in all of it. It was 2 years since a man held me. I closed my eyes, relaxed, and let myself feel all of it, allowing my partner to swing me round, his voice still humming into my ear. Christ in deiner Geburt, Christ in deiner Geburt. The singing stopped, and after a moment, almost reluctantly, he stepped back, releasing me. "Thank you, madame. Thank you very much." When I finally dared to look up, there was tears in his eyes. The next morning, a small crate arrived on our doorstep. It contained 3 eggs, a small poutine, an onion, and a carrot. On the side, in careful script, was marked "Fröhlich Weihnachten." "It means Merry Christmas," Aurelian said. For some reason, he refused to look at me.